Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Kolonas and Mike Rosa.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another This Week in Coworking recap. I'm Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined once again by Mike Rosa. Mike, how are you and where are you?
I'm doing great, Hector. Hope you're having an excellent week so far. I'm dialing in from Sofia, Bulgaria, where I'm attending the 2024 Coworking Europe Conference, which this is the 15th year they've done it. Only missed 1 year since 2013. I guess two if you count the COVID years, if we still think about those. But I'm really having a great time seeing a lot of industry friends, colleagues, folks I've worked with before, folks that maybe I will be working with in the future. You never know. It's really a great gathering. A lot of great conversations being had that kind of parallel some of the trends that we've been talking about lately.
That's awesome. And have you seen any of our This Week in Coworking listeners or readers or patron brands there? Anyone worth giving a shout out to here on the podcast?
Yep, seeing most definitely folks that are subscribers and a few new listeners, that's for sure. And we've even gotten, I think one of our newest podcast subscribers is a gentleman I met that was visiting from Tokyo. Super exciting to hear that he's actually the organizer behind a major conference that's taking place in Okinawa, Japan at the end of January, of which Pauline from Coworkies and Karsten from Desmag and the Global Coworking survey will be there. I can't wait to learn more. I'm going to hopefully see him more tonight. I don't want to leave out any company I might forget, but yeah, a lot of supporters there. And it's exciting to hear, I really enjoy hearing the podcast now or whatnot. So, glad you all are listening and glad you all are enjoying it.
Going over and waving that flag, Mike. It's great to have some representation on the ground as well. But you did mention that there was a lot of conversations that kind of were in the same vein or resonated with the trends that we've been talking about on the podcast. Which one would you say is front of mind as probably the most talked about thing at Coworking Europe this year?
The most talked about thing is management agreements. It's been really interesting. There's a shift, I think, in kind of some of the attendees this year. I noticed there's a lot more multi-location operators that I think are now multi-location. Maybe a few years prior they hadn't. So it's really great to see. And that maps with what Carson's data shows that brands are growing. They're growing in multiple locations. But it's also interesting hearing about the success that some companies have had with management agreements. And also something I didn't know that I just learned coming to this conference is that in Germany, there's actually really strict financial laws that dictate how an asset owner can split off different revenue streams. And so management contracts haven't even begun to hit the ground yet for that type of application. It's hard to imagine that they don't already exist for hotels, but it just sounds to me, go figure, there's probably some very particular German laws in there. And so there was more of a conversation as to, okay, this major trend that's taking place in London that's blowing up right now, why isn't it happening in all these other countries? Or why is it a little bit slower? And that was a big takeaway for me. I didn't realize that was perhaps a hurdle in the German market.
Yeah, it actually makes a really interesting case as to the things we're seeing in some places of the world. There's that opportunity. It goes back to our undercurrents previously this year, where fractional offices is doing really well in some places, but in other places, the contract law doesn't allow it. The financial models don't allow it. The technology doesn't allow it. But if these things change, does it open up a whole new revenue source for the industry in that country? So I'm definitely going to keep an eye on that and see what happens as management agreements become more popular or more possible in countries like Germany. Because I think that this is definitely a trend that we've discussed multiple times. And the fact that it keeps coming up on stage and in the corridors at conferences, it just shows that this is a direction that people are looking to go. More asset light, more CapEx efficient, more OpEx efficient, and just leveraging those really good metrics to get better terms with landlords. So yeah, I didn't know about that either. So thanks for illuminating that for us.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that without giving too much away, I know of a project that's taking place in a building in Chicago that just so happens to be owned by a German pension fund. So it was even more as if they'll be like, okay, they don't have a problem with the law if the building's not in Germany. So then where does that then issue lie? Is it in the regulations for how buildings are deployed and managed and financed or whatnot. So always something, you never know, learn something new every day. And I would just say there was a really good panel on management this morning featuring big names like IWG, but also Johnny from Space Maid, which I believe you've recently chatted with him. I was struggling with some slow internet that day. So unfortunately I missed chatting with him, but I got to see him in person this morning. But yeah, you talked to him a little bit more about that, right?
Yeah, we went really deep into management agreements, into what makes Space Made, and a whole bunch of the stuff. That podcast should be dropping early next week. So if you're listening here, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get that as well.
Nice.
Cool. So one of the links I shared this week in the newsletter, I found just fascinating, just because of the fact of how obvious. It was a post from a member in a UK space run by Clockwise. The member's name was Dima Kiselev, and he was just saying how thankful he was that on a really cold day, or maybe the first really cold day, he walked into the space and there was just like a hot brew of what they called immunity, just there to say, hey, we know it's cold today. We made something for you to feel a little bit better in the weather, boosts your immunity. And he felt seen, he felt appreciated, he felt cared for. And it was just such a little detail. And I was like, guys, girls, everyone in the co-working world, this didn't cost a fortune. This wasn't something that they had to go and get managerial approval for, allocate budget for. It's just a small moment of delight that someone gave another human, and now has been shared numerous times across social media because you made that member feel seen and cared for. So just a very gentle reminder now, as the seasons are changing, as the weather's changing, you have these times to step in there as community managers, as community leaders, be like, hey, we see you, we care for you, we feel for you. Here's a little something to make your day a little bit better.
I think it's a great example as to how this is a hospitality driven industry. And so I think this is just a great reminder of that, right? The best or the pinnacle of hospitality is providing something to someone that didn't know they even needed it or wanted it, right? And so, yeah, what's the cost for a kettle of tea in a airpot for members? It's those little things that really often just make the difference.
Yeah, I think one thing why it probably struck a nerve with me, or a good nerve with me, is there's been a lot of buzz around that book around hospitality. What was it called?
Is it
The
Unreasonable Hospitality, I
Unreasonable
believe?
Spirit. I
Yeah,
believe
it's a
so.
great
Yeah.
book.
Everyone's, oh, we don't think our members should be served with a silver spoon, and I'm like, it's not about that. It's about little things like this. It's the little things like putting a coat hanger in each of the offices. Like, it costs what, $10 to get a coat hanger before winter, and just put it in there saying, hey, we know you guys can need more space. Like little things like that. That's the unreasonable hospitality. It's not running around and making sure you clean their shoes before they get into the office. I think that's the miscommunication a lot of people take away from the book, is if you can do that, great. That's part of your brand, great. But it doesn't mean you have to chase after your members and make them feel uncomfortable with the level of service. Just thinking
Yeah.
about what your members need and treating them like humans, and creating what I love to call those little moments of delight, right? How can you make them smile today is pretty much the goal there. And it becomes more fun. So that's definitely a point I just wanted to bring back into the newsletter, back into the podcast. So thanks for humoring me, Mike.
Of course. No, that's what we're all here for, right? Like little insights and tidbits. And I'm a big fan of mouthwash in the bathrooms at co-working spaces or little things like that always come in handy.
Absolutely. So there's a few interesting stories we could dig into, Mike. There's some market moves being made, there's some mergers, there's a really good example of kind of terminology descriptions. What do you want to start with?
Yeah. Let's dive into that. We're both marketers at heart, right? We love good marketing, just like we love good hospitality. And having been on the occupier side of this, maybe I'm a little overly sensitive to it, or just maybe overly aware of it. But this does harken back a little bit to the conversation that you had with Phil about terminology, right? And there was a little anecdote that he shared about how different stakeholders were throwing around different terms and they weren't comparing apples to oranges. So Hub Australia has a really cool marketing piece that they put out in the form of a 2 slide post on LinkedIn that I viewed as like a choose your own adventure map for co-working. Basically was asking the question of what are you trying to solve for, or how many people do you have, or what type of use case are you trying to Neat, right? And then it directed okay, that's more of a hot desk need, or okay, this more is more of an event space need. Actually, this would be really good for a dedicated desk, or maybe this is going to be better for a private office, right? People call things the same things, all different terms. And I think sometimes that leads the prospect to a little confusion, right? Because what is the difference between a furnished office and a private office? Or maybe perhaps what is the difference between a serviced office and a private office? There's no difference between those, or is there? Right. And
Yeah.
so just a nice shout out to Hub for just a creative marketing piece. There's 1,000 ways that people describe what they offer. And this one was just like the first one that I thought was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love the fact that they called it what the flex. I love a good pun. And I love the fact
Yeah.
that it directly addresses that frustration, right? I want to join your spaces, but I don't know what I need. I don't know what I don't know. Sort of helping both the decision maker, but also the employees figure out what do I need if I'm going to join this. If I'm going to pitch it to my manager, give me the terminology that I can use. So I absolutely love it from that. But I also reminded me of back in 2013 was what do you want to rent a full office or do you want to join a co-working space? And there was just two lines, yes, no. And then it was co-working, no co-working. That was the diagram. That was the product. There was just desks with no contract and having an office somewhere.
Triple net lease and all that came with it. And now look at all the different options there are.
And also different options, but it's just great to see, as you said, all of that on one page, right? Just one diagram, one idea. I think a lot of operators should probably do something like this anyway, if not for outbound marketing and outbound sales, but for your internal onboarding of staff, of teams. If they don't know how to explain your products, it's really difficult to make sure you're continuously selling the right product and upselling the right product based on the benefits, not on the price. Right. So it's just really interesting to see that. So I think we're going to see a lot more. Hopefully, we're going to see a lot more from that. And hopefully, Hub Australia don't mind us giving away the farm with that. Like, guys, everybody do this for your spaces to train your teams up on how to pitch your own products. So there was another piece, which was in our data section. We had 3 big data drops this week. One was from the UK. We've done UK data drops for the last 2 weeks. We're going to jump straight over that one, although it's worth having an analysis as to what different aggregators are showing and doing your own comparison. Maybe next year, maybe we'll be able to do a better comparison for you all, getting that data in and doing a tweak version of all the aggregators data. But let's see how forthcoming the aggregators are with that kind of data set. But there was a data set that I think everybody should notice. There's only a few public companies in our industry worldwide. So whenever one of them releases data, it's always good to do a little bit of analysis and see what they're doing, what they're reporting, and how they're reporting it. I know a couple of quarters ago, IWG started reporting more like a hotel metric, kind of seats per day, seats per month, as opposed to offices, square footage revenue. So it's always good to have a look. So IWG released their Q3 earnings week, and there were some pretty good numbers in there. Mike, what stood out to you off the bat?
All in all, it looks like they've got a pretty rosy picture for where the business stands right now. They've been on a tear for adding new locations through, of course, management agreements and partnerships. They're seeing, I believe, a nice increase in revenue for existing locations. They've taken over some former WeWorks or former other, competitively run spaces that they're absorbing. All in all, I think the numbers point to a healthy business. Let me put it this way. I wasn't surprised by any of the numbers I saw. None of them were like shockingly high. They were all very consistently in the growth territory. I'm not doing justice for the exact numbers, but I don't want to get too misquoted. Were there any numbers that jumped out at you?
Yeah, sure. So what I'll do is I'll just run through some of the numbers just to give some background. Although the IWG network grew by 52% in a kind of new centers, that's 100 new centers in this last quarter compared to 66 in the same quarter last year. They have seen a pretty big growth. Now, their growth in revenue is not the same as that growth of kind of 52%. They saw a 2% year over year increase in kind of system-wide revenue across all their product types. Breaking that down, they saw a 19% year-on-year increase in their franchise revenue, so their franchise fees and that kind of stuff. And then they also saw a 46% rise in the fee revenue. So that's the fees they take on bookings at these franchise locations. So going back to what you said a little bit earlier, Mike, it's a little bit of kind of management agreements under their brands, but it's also a huge franchise play. IWG is leaning very heavily into growth through franchising. And as we see from these numbers, seeing a 40%, 46% increase in fee revenue is a big jump from last year. Not triple figures, it didn't double or anything like that, but it's a nice kind of steady growth. They did say that they have some profitability growth and they reduced their debt $730 million from $768 million. So a pretty big drop in debt. Also a whole bunch of plays that they're making. They have got the activist investor who is chasing them to list on the US stock exchange, in a US stock exchange. So quite a lot of signals through this announcement. Definitely take a look at the numbers as well when you get a chance to check out the newsletter.
What I would also encourage, as someone who loves reading through publicly traded company annual reports, typically it's trying to read the tea leaves of like when the new ride's coming to Disney, right? But sometimes you have to focus on what they're not talking about. Like those numbers were all good, and those numbers told me they're a healthy company. They're enjoying the growth of the overall industry, right? It also tells me that some of their locations are probably already at capacity. So the majority of that growth is coming from the new franchises that they're getting. That's awesome. But something that was very interesting was that they didn't really talk about, but they briefly referenced Worka. So Worka is an app that they've had for many years now, and it was their answer to on demand. And so what I'm very curious to see, there's a lot of stuff swirling, stuff that we don't necessarily want to talk about in this podcast because we only deal in actual truth and published facts, right? But there's a lot of headwinds for the aggregators right now. That's no secret. And I think everyone can acknowledge that. So my question is, for IWG to be the giant of the industry and for them to have had this work app for so long, what is the delay? Are they really that technically challenged, or are they holding out and waiting for some consolidation opportunities, right? So sure, publicly traded companies, the numbers are always great. They always want you to look at those numbers. But my biggest question was, what's going on with Worka? Because we know that on demand and all access as a product for WeWork is a huge piece of that business. And we know that Industrious has rolled out their own on demand. We know that there's a lot of aggregators out there. And so I'm just wondering what is taking them that long? And is the franchise component one of those challenges? Because I know for a fact that companies that have purchased an IWG on demand esque solution have encountered franchise locations that will not accept those bookings. So that's the only thing that I'm curious about after reading all that.
I think that's a very good point. But I just want to clarify and look at what I'm seeing between the lines. And Worka is actually the combined assets of IWG's and Instance digital properties. So there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes. It is severely delayed, but that is the play. This is like that $160 million that they put into that merged entity. That is now Worka. At some point, the Instant Group is supposed to be rebranded as Worka, and that is what that business unit will become. So it's interesting that they're reporting it as just a technology piece, but it's actually an entire merged entity, which if you read the newsletter, you'll know a couple of months ago, they were already looking to exit that at around $1 billion or £1 billion in kind of value. So it's an interesting one. I can't go into kind of why they have delays, or they have 50 something platforms within the Worka group now, or within the Instant group. A lot of management changes as well, as we've seen over the last couple of months over at the Instant group. So we're going to keep watching, and hopefully the next quarter or the final quarter's report will give us more insight into when we can expect the Worka app to finally launch.
Yeah, but listen, like I said, you learn something new every day. So this is new info that I don't even know. So another reason why it's great to subscribe and listen. Hector dropping the inside info.
You heard it here first, right? Once again, this is all for entertainment and educational purpose. We are not financial advisors. Do not take our ramblings as financial advice. Do your own research. Use that to do that research, but definitely dig deeper into the stories before you put money into anything. There is another topic that I wanted to touch on a little bit with you, Mike. I know we're running into time. We try to keep these nice and succinct for everybody. And that was this news article, I think it was in Forbes, right, about polyworking.
Mhm. Yeah.
Really looking at the fact that more and more people are getting into this mindset that it's okay to have multiple sources of revenue or have two completely different things that you do, that one is ultra creative and one is maybe not, or have multiple jobs at the same time just so you can have more financial so like sustainability and have a different kind of lifestyle. um, and I know that across the co-working world, people who are listening who run co-working spaces are like, isn't that what we've been doing our entire lives? Like almost every co-working space person or professional I know has more than two things on at the same time. Like we are a side project industry. Almost every co-working space started as a side project of something. So it's not something new here, but we did touch on a point that if more and more people are, this is becoming more commonplace, how does that change the design of our spaces to accommodate people who may be using the space for two different jobs, right? And how does that play into who pays for what? How does it play into what kinds of amenities you have to have? Maybe they're a programmer in the day, but at night they take product shots and they do. So they need a space that's not only good for programming, but also a great photography studio or great podcasting studio or all these different pieces. So it's not selling just to the employee of the corporation, but also selling to the individual and any side job or side passion or hobby that they may have. Going back to the Johnny episode, a lot of folks join a space for their employer, but they also go rock climbing in the space. They also go to the gym. They go to the on location amenities, and they meet people there, and they have side passions there. And it also goes into what Cohatch is doing. I also chatted with Ryan Fogelman from Cohatch this week. That's in your podcast feed. And a big piece of the empowerment they're doing at Cohatch is to help people understand that it's okay to have multiple revenue sources, to have multiple interests, and to help them develop those skills with this network of 44 locations. So if that's interesting, definitely have a listen to that. But Mike, as someone who I know is a polyworker like myself or a multi-hatter, what do you think about this news? Is it news or is it just making it more, putting a word to it?
And it's just another term to add on to the resume. I think the most recent description that I had heard of was like portfolio life. Like someone had commented, "Oh, but then I just considered that consulting and freelancing. I don't know if it's so much as getting people to come to the conclusion that it's okay or it's fine, but I think it's more so without being too Debbie Downer, like of what the future that we will be entering into, where this is a new era of having multiple different revenue streams. Maybe you do some gig working, maybe you have a full-time remote job, maybe you have a side hustle. Travel agencies are been blowing up. People are doing more of that. Anyway, but I think that it's a couple takeaways for me. One is for operators to remember that you can't just all go into one direction when it comes to design trends. And so one of the topics today at Coworking Europe or this week was like designing for enterprises, which is great. We all know enterprises are starting to use Flex more, but you're going to design a space differently for an enterprise than you are for a freelancer or for a poly worker. And then the other thing that I had is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but file this under the Adam Newman was right category of very early on in the WeWork days, he was insistent on having unique amenities in different locations based on the area or the neighborhood or the industry that they were in. The WeWork in Nashville had a killer recording studio, right? And WeWorks in New York and LA and Austin had podcast recording booths, right? And there had been some more discussion about different types of niche types of amenities, right? So once again, he saw it, he was right, but he was also very wrong about some things. So I think that this also leads, and then I'll shut up and wrap up. I think this also leads to the idea of not only is polyworking okay or acceptable or a good thing, but also let's open up the concept of you could have more than one co-working membership, or you could be a customer of more than one type of co-working space. And you can do that through aggregators out there, which is an easy, probably the easiest way. Or maybe you can just pop around and choose the different spaces that you like. And in DC, there's a lot of different workspaces. There's some that are more focused towards artists. There's some that are, of course, opening up that we've talked about a little bit. We will be talking more about that are industrial flex and co-warehousing. There are also seeing spaces open up that are government contracting oriented, right? That have security skips in them. So I think that this is just supportive of the overall potential and longevity of flex workspace. As long as people have different work needs, there will need to be different workspaces. And so just don't lock yourself into only having one layout, one design, and don't, discount if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, I really wish you had that." If one person's asking for it, chances are there might be other people in that neighborhood, or better than in that person's network that would pay you to use the same type of space.
Well said. And we're definitely seeing, I had said that idea of multiple different amenities, different styles for building. Piloto does it, Space
Yeah.
Mate do it, Industrious do it. It's really interesting to see this becoming more of, you have the overarching brand or the management company, but then each space has its different amenities, targets of different things. And if you can cater to those different audiences, you're capturing that audience. But as you say, just because I work at company X doesn't mean that in the evenings I want to do what company X is doing, right? I can do a whole bunch of other things. I have my own network. Not really for me, because everything I do is pretty much co-working. So I'm pretty much the exception. So all my people are co-working people like yourselves. But there are folks who have better split between their hobbies and their interests than maybe
Yeah,
I do.
and as you mentioned, a lot of co-working spaces started out as the side hustle of a full-time job. So I know that there's co-working spaces out there that were opened up because an architect had extra office space. And so they had drafting boards, or they had like design libraries or material libraries that they could then share. And there was one brand that actually, the architecture firm, I met them probably almost 10 years ago in Australia. They literally left the firm and started their own kind of co-working office for architects, right? And so they were sharing those larger material resources. But yeah, all in all, I think it's just good projections for what our industry has in the future. There's going to be need and demand, and you just evolve with what those are. Pretty soon, I'm sure we'll have VR bings, right? I bet you, if anyone knows out there, please let us know. I almost certain there's a co-working space somewhere in the world that has some type of VR amenity or feature or whatnot. So I'd love to hear about that, because Hector and I might know a lot, but we don't know everything.
Yes. And on that note, if you do think that we missed something this week or any week, hop over to thisweekincoworking.com. There's a little tools thing up at the top of the website. Hit that and just click share link. Anything that you think is interesting that we should probably assess, maybe discuss, share with other co-working people, go in and share that. It's completely free if you're a This Week in Co-working subscriber. So share the links that you think are interesting. Maybe we'll even give you a shout out on here. And thank you for sharing something that maybe we missed. We have pretty good algorithms, but there's so much happening, and we want to make sure that we hear what's happening in your side of the world or your neighborhood or your communities. So definitely please keep sharing your own links, but also things that you think are interesting so that we can bring them into the newsletter. And on that note, that's everything we have to discuss this week. There's a lot more in the newsletter. Hop over to thisweekincoworking.com, click on week 46 and how to read, and let us know on the podcast feed or on our discussions forums. Let us know what caught your attention, what you think, what you disagree with, what you agree with. And we look forward to seeing you once again next week.